Well, good moment to you. I'm your host, Alexander T. Newport, your Philobabblist Extraordinaire, and we're going to talk about A Course in Miracles. I'm reviewing A Course in Miracles from the perspective as a philosopher of 48 years. It was when I was 6.5 years old, 1970, that I showed up to school one day and virtually the school was empty. I asked the teacher, "Where is everybody?" She said they were at a funeral. I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "Well, so-and-so died last week." Obviously a child at the school, someone I didn't know. And I said, "What does that mean?" And I could tell that she was serious and somber and it was, bad news. But she said, "Well, I think that's something you should ask your parents." And, credit to her. That's exactly the right answer. You don't go telling someone else's child what death is. So later that evening, I asked my father, and I remember it just as if it was yesterday. Later that evening, in the kitchen, I asked my father, "What does it mean to die? What does death mean?" And he said, "Son, your mother and I are humanists. And basically, when you're dead, you're dead. You don't think or feel ever again. Zippo, zero, that's it." So, in a manner of speaking, he basically said death leads to eternal oblivion. And I just immediately could not accept that. I did not argue with him. I did not let on the sort of trauma that this caused inside of me. Later that night, I thought about it. I thought, it's one thing if death was just a lonely, silent, black nothingness that you're aware of, but it's a lonely, black, silent nothingness. That, on the one hand, that's bad, but what Dad's saying is that I won't know anything. There will be no me to know anything. There will be no nothing. And I thought that was much worse. And I just found it completely unacceptable. Thus began my blooming as a philosopher. Naturally, when you think about death, and as I did that very night, I thought, what's the point in me being alive for a little while if I'm just going to die forever, if I'm just going to be dead forever? What was the point in even existing? So these questions were on my mind from a very early age, and basically I just kept my ears and eyes open for any discussions about death or the meaning of life or the purpose of life. I eventually studied psychology and philosophy on my own, and realized that none of them were addressing three fundamental questions. And if they did, well, they just skirted it. They just touched the very tippy tip, and that was it. But I eventually realized that there were three fundamental questions that weren't being addressed. The first being, why am I alive as a temporary creature in a temporary world? How did this happen? And the second question, is there a puppet master God? Is there a singular entity? Is there a singular thinking, feeling entity who is responsible for all of us, for everything that's physical? And if not, can life still exist? And then the third question that's very fundamental to all humans, of all races, blazes, what happens when we die? Do we really stop thinking and feeling forever and ever? Yes. We realized that those three questions weren't being addressed. For the longest time, for many years, hundreds and hundreds of books, we didn't have those three questions formulated, but eventually we realized that those were the three questions that weren't being addressed by people calling themselves philosophers, by people revered as philosophers. Well, anyways, come October of 1988, I had an experience with the drug MDMA, and I took it thinking it was just a sort of friendlier version of LSD. I was told that you feel sort of touchy-feely when you're on MDMA, so I just took it purely for recreational purposes. I was 24 years old, and but I ended up having this really super profound experience. I had this breakthrough with cosmic consciousness without intending to do so, without even knowing that such a thing could happen. And we took the drug at 9:30 in the evening. We had it in powder form. We had what looked like to be about nearly a gram. But we broke it up onto a mirror on the coffee table. It made 3 fat lines. One for me, one for my roommate, one for his girlfriend. And we were all relatively about the same size and weight, although I weighed certainly less than each of them. And snorted one line, half the line up one nostril and the other half of the line up the other nostril, and it just instant fire. My whole face was on fire, and I had to lay down. And in laying down, it immediately occurred to me, don't fight the fire, don't fight the pain, don't ask for it to go away. Be the pain. Just be the pain. And so I did, just surrender, be the pain. Don't fight it, don't ask for it to go away, don't wonder how long it's going to last, just be the fucking pain, be the burning. And so I did. And after about a minute or so, it segued into this bliss that just kept getting more and more intense, hour after hour after hour. It was amazing. And we're not talking narcotic bliss, we're talking psychological, realizations, revelations kind of bliss. The most primary message was that everything is absolutely perfect. Everything is unfolding and unfurling absolutely perfect. All the things that look like mistakes, that look like evil, that look like horrible tragedies, that look like things that should have been prevented, are actually just happening right on schedule. And there were a whole bunch of things that I realized that evening. And I was excited to talk about it with someone. But my roommate and his girlfriend weren't the people to talk about it with. They didn't give a shit. Because we're talking about consciousness expansion. We're talking about enlightenment. We're talking about spirituality. We're talking about philosophy. And they didn't give a goddamn about that. In fact, about an hour and a half into the trip, they both, quote unquote, fell asleep. And I remember looking at my roommate as he was asleep on the sofa, and he was just absolutely, completely fucking blissed out, overwhelmed, unconscious from bliss. Because, as I said, I was 24, they were about the same age. I had been a philosopher since I was 6.5. I had studied consciousness expansion, spirituality, philosophy, enlightenment, and they hadn't. So they had no references. They had no language and no reference to handle cosmic consciousness. So instead, they just, quote unquote, fell asleep. They had to lay down and just bliss out into unconsciousness until the next day. It was nothing bad. It wasn't a bad kind of unconsciousness. It's just poof, no language for it, no reference, no words for it, So I wanted somebody to talk to about it, so I called up my dad, 7:30 in the morning, Sunday morning. And my dad considered himself a philosopher, although in hindsight he was more of a political philosopher rather than a life detective philosopher such as myself. But every couple of minutes, while I'm telling him, about these revelations and realizations and insights and so forth, about perception and attitude, and he kept saying, that's what the Course says, or the Course says something like that. And so eventually I had to ask him, what do you mean the Course? What's this Course you keep referring to? And he told me, A Course in Miracles. And so after a while, curiosity got the better of me, and I went to his house and I looked at this A Course in Miracles. And I don't know, I took that MDMA trip in October of '88. I reckon I started reading the course around early '89 or so, and I was ready for it. I was willing to entertain the idea that this is sort of an updated Jesus thing, you know, that it's Jesus talking in a modern language. It's a saner as well, a saner kind of Jesus. So I was willing, to be open to that. Not that I quote unquote believed in Jesus, but just I had learned even by that tender age of 24 as a philosopher that there's a lot of things you've got to expose yourself to, especially stuff that's poo-pooed and considered forbidden or laughed at or ridiculed. You got to look at it. If you're a detective, you got to look at it. You leave no fucking stone unturned. I mean, I started off my studies at the age of 22, and it didn't take long to realize that the whole subject and so-called science or profession of psychology is just a load of horse shit. It's just a load of crap. Originally, psychology was called the talking therapy, and that's its best point, really. Beginning and end right there, really. And I studied philosophy and realized it was just a load of fucking diarrhea. Especially the so-called brand name famous philosophers. Most of them just load of diarrhea. Especially Nietzsche. Diarrhea, diarrhea, diarrhea. Now, as far as, Socrates and Plato, that's a different situation, man. Those guys were into getting into subatomic, mental mechanics. But anyway, so I studied psychology, philosophy, saw it was just a load of horse shit, and therefore broke into Edgar Cayce, Ruth Montgomery, broke into these trance-channeling kind of books, and other New Age kind of books, New Age thing, books about books written by people who supposedly got taken aboard spaceships from aliens from outer space, people who are writing books that are being dictated to them by people that are way out in other galaxies, people who are writing books being dictated by so-called angels or the Archangel Michael, or but I realized, you can find little gems and bits and pieces and all the stuff that's considered forbidden and mad and crazy and insane. You can find little gems that are helpful, because here's the thing, as a philosopher of 48 years, at the age of 54, I can tell you, you're not going to find any fucking book that's like some kind of goddamn manual, and you're going to be able to now steer your life exactly where you want it to go, avoid any pain or illness or injury or disease or misfortune. No, you're not. Not a single goddamn book on this planet, not even the ones I write, is gonna be some kind of panacea, give you some kind of perpetual peace through all, trials and tribulations. No. You're here for the story. You're here for the ups and downs and twists and turns and the pain and the agony and the happiness and the satisfaction and dissatisfaction and so on and so forth. You're here for it all. So by the time the course came into my life, I was pliable, I was malleable. I knew I had to, not be closed-minded, especially when something comes into your life. That's how it comes into your life. Somebody mentions it, or you see something about it. It's now, introduced itself into your life. And like I said, I just happened to be ready for it. So I studied the course earnestly, and I read the entire text. I did about the first 30 days of the workbook for students. It may be technically 28 days, but let's just be safe and say it was 30 days. I did the first 30 days of the workbook for students, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand subjected myself to this kind of slavery, and I just thought, how dare some fucking book tell me I gotta fucking take it. The Course in Miracles says, yeah, you got free will about when you want to take the course, but you don't have free will about what the course teaches or what you have to learn. So, and then, so even though I only did about the first 30 days of the workbook, I did study the rest of the workbook. I just didn't, I just refused to be a slave, or refused to put myself through these exercises once or twice or however many times a day you were supposed to do it. I didn't like it. I didn't like following a book. Excuse me. I didn't like, being a slave to a fucking book telling me what to do. I mean, there was one point it's a very anti-ego book. Very anti-ego. Which caused me no end of suffering, because I took it serious. If I'm going to study the Course, I'm going to, do my best to understand what it's saying, and walk around with its ideas and employ its ideas and its perceptions and its attitudes and so forth, and the thing is as you study things, as you read things, whether it's just once or many times, as time goes by, the wheat separates from the chaff. At least personally, subjective for you. Anything that's valuable, begins to reveal itself. You begin to realize, that book taught me this, this, or this. I learned this, this, or this about myself, from reading this book. You learn to identify, or it just happens naturally, that whatever you benefited from it, you keep. It's safe to dismiss and forget all the rest. Now, so I read the text, I studied the workbook, I studied the text, we should say as well. Studied the text, studied the workbook, studied the teacher's manual, the manual for teachers. At the time, my dad also had these various pamphlets that Helen Schucman had scribed after she had scribed the Course. And, I spent, at least a year or so, walking around talking to the Holy Spirit. I mean, before I called it the Holy Spirit, I was calling it the higher self, But I adopted the name Holy Spirit, and I would talk to the Holy Spirit and attempt to, be guided by the Holy Spirit. And I have to say, it was a trippy ride. There's some very nice ideas in there. There's some exciting and fun ideas in there. But there's also a lot of bad ideas. So as I said, I'm reviewing this from the perspective of a philosopher, and it's a fucking peculiar situation to be in as well, because actually there's an element of the Course which is absolutely valuable, very, 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 very valuable. And it's just so strange that it's in the Course, because it doesn't belong there. So let me say that for those of you who don't know, overall, the point of the Course, the message of the Course, is that this is a nightmare that you're involved in. This is a dream world that you're involved in. You can call it an illusion if you want, but this physical existence is an illusion, is a dream, and you're not supposed to be having it. It's the result of an error in judgment. You made a mistake. You asked for the impossible, and now here you are. So it's saying that you are presently asleep, having a nightmare, having this dream of this physical self, this physical life, and that the Course is going to help you realize that you have the Holy Spirit in you, who will help guide you awake while you're here in this dream, and thus help you to help others awake from this dream. At one point in the Course, it said, quote unquote, God weeps for his sons because they're having a nightmare. like I said, the overall flavor of the book is that most of your suffering is because of your ego. So the Course is attempting to help not necessarily kill the ego or transcend the ego, but just somehow show you the difference between what an ego would tell you in your head and what the Holy Spirit would tell you in your head. You know, sort of like trying to show you there's a difference in here, that there's a spiritual perspective that you can listen to, or there's an egotistical, very base, vulgar, you know, materialistic, vain, vanity-oriented perspective. And therefore, philosophically, its perspective is that this existence is obviously free will, free play, moment by moment. You know, at no point does it say in the Course that this is a predestined, pre-planned, pre-scripted existence. As I said, its premise is that you are here as the result of an error. It doesn't explain to you what that error in judgment was, and when it says that you asked for the impossible, it doesn't fucking spell it out. Although you can guess. You can reckon that, what does it mean I asked for the impossible? Did I ask to have a life without God? Did I ask to have a godless existence? So that's very interesting. You know, that it says God weeps for his sons because they're having a nightmare. It's very interesting that its whole premise is that this physical existence of yours is a mistake. And see, you know, when you're an up-and-coming philosopher, like I say, you're willing to try on these different programs, these different schools of thought, these different ideas, and you have to walk around with them for a while, like a pair of glasses or a new pair of shoes, and, you know, see what it feels like. Looking through life through this perspective and these ideas that are presented in the Course. As, like I say, as time went on, I began to realize that the anti-ego agenda of A Course in Miracles is toxic. It is toxic if you take it all way too seriously, or if you just take it seriously. You're going to end up with some toxic results. And but so even though its premise is all messed up, you know, seeing this as a mistake, this existence as an error in judgment, it has something that absolutely contradicts the Course itself, and that can be found in the early pages of the text. I can't remember if it's called a preface or an introduction, I'm not sure. I threw the book away a couple of years ago. I mean, I literally threw it in the fucking trash. So I can't look at it, but it was the first couple of pages, first few pages. It has a summary. It summarizes itself. It says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, herein lies the peace of God. And even though, you know, I studied the text at least twice, if not 3 times in its entirety, it wasn't until perhaps the 4th or 5th time that I just was sort of thumbing through the book that I settled onto the summary again. And I was suddenly spellbound, because I realized, look, and get this, because I went into the Course with a natural gullibility, you know, willing to just take it at face value. Let's just take it at face value and believe it and see where it gets us, see what happens. Because of that, let me hit the pause button real quick. Sorry about that. So yeah, so there's a gullibility, and therefore sort of a reluctance to challenge the authority of the Course. Yeah, silly as that sounds. But after a while I realized, this summary, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, herein lies the peace of God. It's telling us that God is at peace. Now, for God to be at peace, there ain't no way he's going to weep because his sons are having a nightmare. You can't have the two. You can't have someone that's at peace and also weeping because his sons are having a nightmare. If he's at peace, he don't give a goddamn. Why? Why doesn't he give a goddamn? Because nothing real can be threatened. Well, how many students of A Course in Miracles really get into that real word? Because that's the key there, Jack. God's at peace. Why is God at peace? Because what is real can't be threatened. Well, it begs you to wonder, what the hell is real then? What is real? After many years, I realized that what is real is perfect eternal conscious energy. That what is real are perfect spirits. That every living being, every living creature is actually a perfect spirit who is perfectly equal and equally perfect to all other spirits. They are all perfect eternal conscious energy. It has always existed, hence the word eternal. Something that is eternal has always existed. It had no birth date. It had no creator. It had no source. It had no beginning. It has no end. So you had to think about, what is this real? What is eternal? Obviously, what is life? Life is consciousness. Consciousness is thinking and feeling and being aware that you are a thinker-feeler. That's what life is. All of life is perfect eternal conscious energy. Perfect spirits, perfect entities. Each is a thinking, feeling entity. Perfectly equal and equally perfect to all others. Not one of them is older or younger, dumber or smarter. They're all equally perfect and perfectly equal, and it's not through legislation, and it's not through agreement. It's just the way it is. If you're eternal, you can't be threatened. If you're eternal, you're perfect. Perfect eternal conscious energy is infinitely intelligent. Now, what's it to do with its intelligence? Its ability to think and feel throughout eternity. What's it to think and feel throughout eternity? It's already perfect. It's unthreatenable. It doesn't have to do anything to maintain its existence. There is ever no threat to its existence. So what's it to do throughout eternity? Well, obviously, it's going to create these dream worlds, these dream selves, these dream lives, these dream stories. And then it's going to choose to forget that it is perfect eternal conscious energy, and thus choose, forget that it's the author of its existence. So the summary, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, herein lies the peace of God. It's telling you God's at peace. Why is God at peace? Because nothing real can be threatened. Well, what is real? Well, perfect eternal conscious energy, perfect spirits. They're the ones that are real. And they're unthreatenable. And so they can have any goddamn dream they want to. Furthermore, of course, there is no God. The God in A Course in Miracles is still that singular entity, that singular personality, that one thinking, feeling entity who's responsible for all the zillions and zillions and zillions of us other thinking, feeling entities. The Course is very strange because the author of the Course, Helen Schucman, didn't really like anything that she was writing. She was the scribe of it. It came to her. It pushed itself out of her. Was it a voice? No, it wasn't a voice. The way she described it, in a recording that I heard of an interview with her, the way she described it really just sounds like that's how any of us write a book. a book pushes itself out of you. The book's already in you. You're not really creating it on the fucking page. No matter how much fucking revision and cutting and chopping and moving things around, that's just the way it was meant to be. But it still pushed itself out of you. You know, you're not really creating it. So her description of how the book wrote itself through her sounds just the same as the way books write themselves out of anyone, really. But to make it clear, it wasn't a voice. And we've got a barking dog downstairs. Anyways, the point is, the irony is that the author of A Course in Miracles was not necessarily a proponent or follower of A Course in Miracles. Spirituality, enlightenment was not her bag. She was a medical psychology or she was a professor of psychology at Columbia University. So, you know, a very straight world where they don't entertain mysticism or anything like that. In fact, she was not identified as the author of the book, The Course, until after she died. That's the way she wanted it. I'm going to go give this dog his supper, and I'll be right back. So yeah, I eventually, you know, had to realize that the Course, it doesn't matter that it claims to be divinely inspired or the work of Jesus or God or anyone else. It's a book. It was written by a human being. And so I realized I had to just take the parts, the little gems that I liked, and leave everything else. Just let it fly by the wayside. I remember, I think there was a line in the workbook, but it might have been elsewhere. It said, I am not a body, I am free, I am still as God created me. It's basically just saying that you're a spirit and you're still a spirit, even though you think presently you're a body. But as I say, the flaw of the Course is that it sees this whole existence as a mistake, and I think that's largely due to the fact of Helen Schucman's profession, which, you know, sees life and the way people think or the way people behave or whatever as a bunch of fucking mistakes that need to be fixed and improved and corrected and so on and so forth. Really, it's just very amazing, the fact that that Helen didn't really care for any of the contents of the Course. You know, I just find that very amusing. She's scribing something that she doesn't give a damn about. So, you know, where the hell she got that summary from, I don't know. But it absolutely contradicts the book. Because the summary's telling you nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. It's telling you God is at peace. Doesn't say God is bothered, doesn't say God is worried, doesn't say God is weeping, you know, for his sons because they're having a nightmare and they don't realize why or blah blah blah. No. It says God is at peace because nothing real can be threatened. So you have to get into that word real. And eventually you realize that what is real is life itself. Life itself is consciousness. Consciousness is perfect eternal conscious energy. That consciousness is a perfect thinking, feeling entity who is eternal and indestructible and unthreatenable. And so what's it to do with its consciousness forever, ever? Obviously, you're going to use your imagination and you're going to concoct one of these dream worlds, dream cells, dream stories. You're going to plan it all out, every moment, every detail, all the bad, all the good. There are no mistakes. There is no divine intervention. There are no miracles. It's all unfolding and unfurling perfectly as we intended it. And you'll notice that since the Big Bang, it's all just been one long event. It's just one event, Jack. It's just one long day with many naps. But it's all unfolding and unfurling. And in order for something to unfold and unfurl, it had to have been folded and furled in the first place. It had to be packed. It had to be conceived, planned, designed, intended, in collaboration and collusion with your fellow perfect spirits, who are going to be your friends, your family, your co-workers, your strangers, your dogs, your cats, your potatoes, your carrots, your cactus, your palm tree, and so on and so forth. I made some notes here. Let me just double check it. Yeah, copyright issue. Originally, it was Helen's understanding, once the course was finished, that the spirit of the course itself, being sort of, you might say, rooted in brotherhood, because it talks in terms of brothers. It doesn't even talk in terms of females or she's. It talks in terms of God and his sons. But anyways, sort of in the spirit of brotherhood, it was Helen Schucman's understanding that once the course was finished, typed up, that it would then be photocopied, and in each person that receives the photocopy is encouraged to make more photocopies and then just distribute it for free. It was also her understanding that the course was not going to create any kind of church, and that it was not to be regarded as some kind of new religion. But more importantly, it was Helen Schucman's intention and understanding that the course should be freely distributed and therefore free of copyright. Well, some little people calling themselves the Foundation for Inner Peace, well, they got it in their head, I guess, after Helen was dead, I don't know, but that they were going to copyright it. And so for years, they derived income as the sole copyright holders of A Course in Miracles. Well, some intrepid person or persons did some digging around and realized, that there had already been a precedent set that A Course in Miracles was part of the public domain, and therefore the Foundation for Inner Peace had no right whatsoever to lay copyright claim to it in the first place, because it had already been set as a precedent as a work in the public domain by the fact that the original copies were photocopied, distributed, and people were encouraged to photocopy and distribute it freely. And so, as far as I know, Foundation for Inner Peace lost their copyright hold on A Course in Miracles. Nowadays, whatever they lay copyright claim to is peculiar. I believe that they're still trying to lay copyright claim to the materials that Helen wrote after she wrote A Course in Miracles, but I'm not 100% sure about that. All I know is a federal court judge ruled that A Course in Miracles is a work in the public domain, and you can copy it and quote it and do whatever the hell you want with it. I suggest you set it on fire or throw it into the mouth of a volcano, because I guarantee you, if you take it serious, that anti-ego stuff is going to twist you into some toxic spaces, Jack. Some toxic hang-ups and trips. Like I say, for me as a philosopher, and as I was going to say a moment ago, where the hell did she get this idea for the summary of the course? Because the course just doesn't jive with the summary at all. I realized that, my goodness, it's telling me God is at peace because nothing real can be threatened. If God is at peace, I don't need the course. The course is full of shit when it tells me that, yeah, you got free will, about when you take the course, but you don't have any free will about what the course is about or what you need to learn or blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. You're a book. You were written by a human being But what an incredible little fucking diamond of higher states of consciousness. What an incredible fucking diamond of cosmic consciousness is this little phrase. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So just throw away the word God, because it's an icky, ugly, patriarchal, singular entity, puppet master bullshit term, and just replace it with perfect eternal conscious energy. Nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of perfect eternal conscious energy. Herein lies the peace of all perfect spirits. And there's only perfect eternal conscious energy. There isn't levels. There's only that kind of energy. There's no hierarchy in our spiritual home state of awareness. Our home state of awareness is spiritual sanity and sobriety, and utter clarity, utter bliss. You don't have to think anything. You don't have to feel anything. You can rest at complete peace. But obviously, after a while, throughout eternity, that's going to get boring, especially when you know that you have the option to plan and script out a dream, a spiritual movie of sorts, and then live it out in the flesh, or the bark, or the scales, or the feathers, or whatever kind of creature you end up being. But we have nothing better to do than that throughout eternity. So, bless the course. I give it 1 star. I'd love to give it 5 stars just because of that incredible gem of the summary that is not the summary of A Course in Miracles, that stands out like like a shining, beautiful emerald in a big giant pile of shit, is the way it stands out. And but you know, I have to give the book 1 star because like I say, it's going to lead you into some toxic adventures psychologically if you take it seriously and earnestly. That's what it's going to do to you, so therefore I don't recommend it. But if you're a philosopher, and it's already knocking at your door, introducing itself, chances are you're going to have to go through it. You're going to have to read it just to see what all the fuss is about, and just to realize that Eckhart Tolle and that Mary or Marie or whoever the hell her name, Marianne Williamson, you know, realize that they're all full of shit. I mean, there's levels to enlightenment, you know, but no. There's nothing nice or lovely about the book at all. It's quite icky. I mean, it's got these little gems here and there that are little reflections of cosmic consciousness. Not the least of which is that little line: "I am not a body. I am free. I am still as God created me." But of course, there is no God. There is no creator. Eternal entities cannot be created. Eternal entities cannot create anything eternal, because what is eternal has no beginning. So therefore it can never have a creator. It has always existed. But nonetheless, we just changed the word. I am not a body. I am free. I am still perfect conscious eternal energy. So yeah, so there you go. So I give it 1 star because I think that if you study the course earnestly and seriously, it's going to lead you into some toxic states of mind. It will also, conversely, as this crazy life goes, it will put you in some states of feeling really, really good or happy or gleeful, perhaps. It's a journey, studying the course. You know, the things it tells you, some of those things are going to upset you, some of those things are going to soothe you. Well, there you go. I have been your host, Alexander T. Newport, your Philobabblist Extraordinaire. I have other videos available at my YouTube channel, The Al Newport Show. not only hundreds of other videos to do with Philobabble, which is philosophy, spirituality, and enlightenment, but videos pertaining to A Course in Miracles. I think pretty much saying the same stuff that I've said in this one, but anyways, visit us there at the Al Newport Show at the YouTube, and hit subscribe. Share the videos on your playlist, even if you don't get very many visitors. It's just a groovy thing. And be cool, fool.